Welcome to Honoring the Journey. I'm Leslie Neese, your host and also your tour guide through yet another amazing journey that we get to travel through today with, oh my goodness, you guys, I can't even believe I get to talk to this guy, Reza Aslan. I don't know if you know the name. You may know his face if you saw the documentary God and Country, because that's where I saw him for the first time. And then I realized that I listened to him on Metaphysical Milkshake with Rainn Wilson many, many times. I didn't realize I didn't put two and two together. It just didn't even like connect. So there's so much more about this guy though. Hang on, I've got a little list, because there's so much fun stuff. For one thing, he's a writer. He's an Emmy and Peabody nominated producer and a scholar of religions. He wrote the New York Times bestseller Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth, and also a book called Beyond Fundamentalism, Confronting a Religious Extremism in a Globalized Age, which, oh my word, what a great book. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness. An American Martyr in Persia, The Epic Life and Tragic Death of Howard Baskerville. That's his newest book that I'm sure we're going to get to hear about. It's so interesting. And he was the co host, as I said, of Metaphysical Milkshake with Rainn Wilson. It was actually a podcast I started listening to when I started deconstructing and found it very informative. So, Reza, welcome to Honoring the Journey.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm really excited to be on the program. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, it is going to be fun. I'm so like when I heard about your journey, I was like, if I don't get him on here, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just have to share this journey with my listeners because it's so amazing. But before we get started into all that, though, I really like to start the podcast off getting to know my guests, just more on a personal level.
Mhm.
So I ask just a question randomly, and the one I think would be fun to ask you would be, what is a favorite memory that you have from your childhood that you could share?
From my childhood, huh? I had a pretty turbulent childhood, but
Oh,
I,
did you?
yeah. So I don't know if I would call this necessarily favorite,
Favorite?
but it's one that has come up a lot. Uh, I was born in Iran, and my
Yes.
family fled in 1979 during the Iranian Revolution.
Wow.
And were forced to kind of flee at the last minute. We had to leave everything behind, and we ended up arriving in the States with nothing, basically.
How old were
We arrived
you?
in Oklahoma. We arrived in Enid, Oklahoma.
How old were
Um,
you at this time?
7.
Oh my word.
And then my
Wow.
sister was 5 or 4. My sister was 4. But the first place that we lived was in this kind of cheap motel, and it was like one-room motel, and my parents had told the management that they were alone, that they didn't have kids, it was just the 2 of them, because they couldn't afford anything else. And
Wow.
so during the daylight hours when the manager was on the property, my sister and I had to stay inside the motel room at all times. And then at
Wow.
night, we would go out and swim in the pool and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But as kind of, depressing as that sounds, it actually was awesome because we just arrived in the United States. We didn't speak any English. We had nothing to do but sit on a motel room, on a motel room bed all day and
Wow.
watch television.
Is that how you
And
learned English?
it's exactly how I learned English. Yep, yep,
Wow.
that's how I learned
That's
it, and I became
amazing.
fluent in no time. It's how I
Wow.
learned everything about, America, American culture. It's how I, like, familiarized myself with American racism and politics and
Mm.
just everything that's involved, that basically I learned during those months sitting with my 4-year-old watching, Bugs Bunny cartoons and, um episodes of Sanford and Sons and, and Good
Whoa.
Times and,
No wonder you're
uh,
saying
that's
racism.
yeah, exactly. That's basically, how I learned what it was to be American and in
Yeah.
America, and,
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty, spectacular time, so I don't know if it's a necessarily a happy memory, but it
No,
is.
but you know what though? I think it says so much though that like even though you were going through so much, like you can still find the joy. the
Mhm.
things that spark joy in you as a child, and that's, I think, the benefit of going through that even as a child is there's always gonna be some magic there, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah,
I'm glad you
yeah.
found that in our American television.
Well, it's not like we didn't have TV in Iran, we obviously did,
Yeah,
but it was 1 channel,
right.
and it was mostly for grown-ups, and
Yeah,
so, the idea that there were 3 channels
yeah.
back then
Whew,
3!
wow.
I know,
So this
3
is
whole
before Fox.
channels. Yeah, this is way
ABC, CBS,
pre-Fox.
NBC, yeah.
Yeah, way, way before Fox,
Wow.
was, incredible, and that something was always on, and it was a completely new experience.
Oh, that's so fun. Wow, okay, so 7 years old, you went through that. That had to be I mean, it probably was pretty traumatic. Did you have to leave a lot of friends and family?
Yeah, it was, a sort of, I think it was a last minute kind of decision, and we did get
Mm,
out right before the airports closed.
wow.
We got out right before, the US embassy was seized, and once the US embassy was seized, basically the country shut down. There was no
Mm,
getting in or out, and so we were kind of among the last group to be able to leave, post-revolution.
wow. So growing up now, were you raised Islam? Is that the religion that you were?
Yeah, I mean, my family was Muslim the way so many people are religious, right? It was just
Mhm,
a part of who we are. It's part of our identity.
mm.
Um, my father, however, became a communist in college and was just, all of his life this rabid atheist,
Oh, wow.
like hardcore rabid atheist.
Hmm.
I always joke, the kind of atheist who always had a pocket full of Prophet Muhammad jokes, you know, ready to pull out at inappropriate times,
Oh, yeah.
like that kind of atheist, not the quiet, polite kind of atheist.
Right.
Um, and so, in a kind of ironic way, my father's atheism is what probably ended up saving the day for us because he this is long before the clerical takeover of Iran. People don't really understand what happened. So Iran had a revolution in 1979, but it wasn't an Islamic revolution, as it is current, as it has been sort of described as such. It
Right.
was an anti-imperialist revolution that was led by liberals and men and women and Jews and Christians and Muslims and people on the left, people on the right, secularists, communists had a huge role in that
Oh,
revolution.
wow.
Marxists played a massive role in that revolution. But as often happens when you have these kinds of massive popular revolutions, it was in the post revolutionary chaos, the
Mm,
aftermath of the revolution, that the sort of strongest voice rose to the top. And in Iran, the strongest voice at the time belonged to Ayatollah Khomeini,
mm.
who managed to take over the entire country a year after the revolution had uh, succeeded. And I think my dad, post revolution, but before Khomeini's takeover, um, sort of read the tea leaves. And, he's just somebody who's never trusted anything anyone wearing a turban had to say about any subject. And so as soon as he saw Khomeini in the political realm, he thought, "Ooh, it's time to get the hell out of here
Yeah,
right
we're
now."
leaving.
So yeah, so that
Wow.
premonition turned out to be true.
Wow, you know what? It's I think what's even amazing to me is I think Americans get this idea in their head that everyone in Iran and in the Middle East is very religious. So for me to hear that there's this like, reeling atheist raising his family there, I'm like, wow, how did that happen?
There's 2 phenomena that are at play in that statement that you just made. The
Mhm.
first is that Americans don't know anything about
Yes.
any other country or any other people or any other culture.
Yep.
They're just completely ignorant about
Self-absorbed.
most of the world. Yeah,
We're
most
we're
Americans.
self-absorbed, it's what we are.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Mhm.
Secondly, Americans tend to identify themselves
Mm.
in opposition to others, and then they just kind of invent the other,
Mm.
right? And we have done this forever.
Yes.
Sometimes the other is Irish Catholics, sometimes the other is Mexicans, sometimes the other is Muslims, sometimes the other is, any immigrant, sometimes the other is gay people. We just kind of invent this opposing force out of whole cloth, and then we use that invention to define ourselves against.
Mhm.
America is the most religious country in the world, bar none. Bar none. I don't mean the most religious country in the developed world.
Right.
We are the most religious country in the world. And so we like to we look at Iran and we say, well, that those people are crazy religious.
Mm.
They want to, create a state based on religious law. Uh, have you checked out the Republican Party recently? I
Unfortunately, yes,
mean,
I have.
you know, whereas Iran, as anyone who's been there will tell you, is probably one of the least religious
Wow.
populations in the world. Now, partly that has to do with the fact that they live under a religious dictatorship. And when
Yeah,
you live
yeah.
under a religious dictatorship, what do? You become less religious, right? When it was a secular dictatorship, Iran was very religious. Now that it's a religious dictatorship,
This is
I mean,
interesting.
yeah.
I wonder if the Republicans know this. I wonder if they're aware,
We
that
discovered
this is how it
eventually.
goes. If you're gonna force feed people religion, they're probably not gonna wanna do it. Interesting.
Any parent should know this,
Yeah,
right?
well, yeah, exactly, but yeah, that's interesting. Wow. Okay, so you're 7 years old, you're in Oklahoma? Why did you choose Oklahoma? Do you know, or was it
Hard to
just
say.
random?
So when my dad was in college, he did a semester abroad
Okay.
in Oklahoma. I don't remember the exact college. And so when it was time to leave Iran, this kind of last second decision to leave Iran before everything shut down, I think he just thought Oklahoma was America.
That's so
Like,
cute. I
you
love
know what
it.
I mean? I think
Yeah,
he just thought,
yeah,
well,
I
we're going to
do.
America. That's Oklahoma, right?
There's no other city,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Now it turns out, he's not wrong.
Right.
He's not, I mean, it is pretty darn America.
Yeah, it is.
Um, but after about a year or so living in Oklahoma, I think we kind of understood, oh, this is a much, much bigger country than
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
and we headed to the West Coast, and I grew up in the Bay Area.
Oh, that's fun. Oh, that's so different. I mean, I bet
Mhm.
that was very
Very
different for you. A little cooler, lots of water.
cooler, other ethnicities, other
Yeah.
Iranians, honestly. That's the thing that was kind of there were a lot of Iranians in
Oh, that's
California.
nice. So you kind of felt a little more at home there. That's nice.
Yeah, I think we had a more of a community, that's for sure.
So tell me a little bit about your religious upbringing. So maybe were Muslim younger, I guess, but then I think something happened and you changed to Christianity at some point. What happened?
Yeah, so as I was saying earlier, I think my experience of Islam is like what most people's experience of their religion is. It's just
Yeah,
kind of a part of their
baked in.
identity.
Yeah.
One of my sort of mantras that I sort of talk about all the time when I'm talking about, religion, what it is, what it isn't, etc., is that I think people think that religion is a matter of beliefs and practices. And that's partly true. Obviously, your beliefs and your practices are important, but religion is first and foremost a matter of identity, not a matter of beliefs and practices. There are, as you probably know, countless people who would call themselves Christian, but who
Mm.
couldn't name a Bible verse if their life depended on it. One of them is about to become president. Um, so this idea, right, that like, oh, I'm a Christian, even though like, oh no, I don't really believe in all of that stuff, and I can't really, place it. That's a fairly standard way in which people identify religiously, because when we say I am Christian, I am Jewish, I am Muslim, I am Buddhist, I am whatever, we're not necessarily making a faith statement. We're making an identity statement.
Mm.
And as an identity statement, it is wrapped up in all the other markers of your identity, that could be your nationality, your ethnicity, your race, your political affiliation, your economic status, your gender, your sexual orientation. all of those things are different markers of your identity alongside that religious identity. And when they wrap themselves together, they create the cord, the rope that is who you are. And so there is no such thing as religion in a vacuum. That doesn't exist. That's a
Mhm.
fantasy. You cannot say I am blank without in having that statement be influenced by all those other parts of your identity.
Yeah.
Well, for
Yeah.
us, it really wasn't until I came to the United States that I even understood that I was Muslim.
Oh,
You know,
really?
for 7 years, I would, yes, of course, we'd go to mosque on special days, and and that was kind of our understanding. But it wasn't until I came to the US and then other people said, "Oh, this is what you are," that it occurred to me that, "Oh,
Mhm.
this is a thing that I am." Um, but of course, at the same time, I think part of the appeal from my father, about leaving Iran is that he didn't have to kind of play the game anymore, right? Like, this
Right.
was an opportunity for him to just strip our lives of religion. And
Mhm.
so once we got to the US, I didn't really grow up with any kind of religious training or identity or edification of any kind. My mom would pray every once in a while, but we didn't really have that in my household
Right.
once we came to the States. Also, remember, this is 1980. This is
Yeah.
the height of the Iran hostage crisis, not the
Yeah.
best time to be either Iranian or Muslim, right?
Oh,
So I was perfectly fine running away from
yeah.
that identity. I've joked about this, for years, that I spent a good part of the 1980s pretending to be Mexican. Um, which the joke is, it tells you
Ugh.
how little I understood America.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
thought that would help, and
no.
it actually
It's
did not help at all. It just, turns out Americans not so
yeah.
fond of Mexicans
Mm.
either.
Oh,
Um,
man.
and so I think for me, I grew up with this real desire, both intellectually. I mean, I had just watched the power of religion transform my entire country and my
Right.
life,
Yeah.
but also emotionally. I just kind of had this desire for a spiritual fulfillment that was just not available to me in my household. And so, to your point, yes, in high school, I started going to a youth group with some friends, a Christian youth group, evangelical Christian youth group. And I
Mhm.
heard the gospel story for the first time, when I was, I think, 15, 16. And it was a remarkable story. It was a
Yeah.
transformative story. I'd never heard a story like that before. And so I immediately converted to a very particularly conservative brand of evangelical Christianity, and then spent the next, I don't know, 5, 6 years, 7 years, preaching that gospel in the way that
Wow.
I had heard it. And then when I went to college, I decided that I was going to study religion. I wanted to be a writer, but like immigrants, you can't tell your mother that you're going to be a writer. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
I
Gotcha.
actually have a distinct memory of telling my mom that I wanted to be a writer, and she said, "Who's stopping you from writing? You
Oh my
go be a
goodness.
doctor and then you write."
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, mom, I want to be a writer. Like I want to do that as my job." And she's like, "That's not a job. That's not a real thing."
Mm.
Because in our that was the world that we grew up in. Like, that's not a job. That's a
Yeah.
hobby.
That's something you do
Uh,
at night in your journal.
exactly. You do that every night. Nobody's stopping you from writing. Write all you want to.
You don't need
Um,
school for that. Sorry.
so I decided to study, religion academically.
Uh-huh.
And I think, it was again another one of these epiphanies where I suddenly started understanding kind of what religion actually is, as I was describing before, like how it's expressed, the historical aspects of it. Um, and then also more specifically, learning more about the historical Jesus of Nazareth and
Mm.
the chasm
And the
that
what?
separate the chasm,
Oh,
the
yes. Yes.
huge,
Yes.
you know, uh,
Use.
like Grand Canyon sized chasm that separates the Jesus of history
Yeah.
from the Christ of faith that at least the Christians that I hung out with
Mhm.
were worshiping.
Yeah.
And to put it in its simplest way, I became far more interested in the Jesus of history.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you say that. I'm not a scholar of religion. I'm just somebody who's trying to find answers, like an everyday, whatever. But I do remember the first time I went, wow, this Jesus seems so much more like somebody I'd wanna follow, than the one that I was taught about. And it's funny, people are like, "Are you, atheist now?" I'm like, "No, I might be
No.
atheist to the God that I was taught about, but I'm not an atheist at all." I'm more, I think, in tune now spiritually than I ever was because I've let go of some of the dogma and some of the
Yeah.
things that they taught me that were very, in retrospect, it feels like a little for control and manipulation. It didn't really feel like love. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I get that.
It's funny that you say that. Um, if you so to the dogma, right?
Mhm.
The core of traditional Christian teaching is that Jesus is simultaneously fully God and fully man. Great. Let's just separate that for a moment. So
Mhm.
he is fully man. Let's talk about the man just for a minute, okay?
Yeah.
Because who was this man, this
Right.
historical man? Maybe he was God. Great. That's fine. Let's just put that aside for a moment and just focus on what you believe, which is he was
Yeah.
fully man. Well, if he was a man, he lived in a very specific time and place. He was a product of that time and place. He
Mhm.
spoke to a very specific audience about historically contextual issues that they were dealing with, right? So
Yes.
let's talk about who that man was. The Jesus of history was a illiterate, uneducated, impoverished, and I mean the poorest of the poor. I always kind of explain to people think that Jesus was a carpenter, that he's like some like middle class businessman. Jesus wasn't a carpenter. The Bible never calls him a carpenter. The Bible calls him a tecton. A tecton is an artisan. You know what a tecton is? A tecton is the guy standing outside of Home Depot waiting for a truck to take him to a work site for a day of work. That's what a tecton is, a day
Wow.
laborer. The Romans used the word tecton as a swear word. The Romans used Jesus's occupation as a swear word.
Wow.
That's how low this man was. And yet, through the power of his charisma, through the
Mm.
power of his teachings, he managed to launch a movement on behalf of people just like him, the poor, the marginalized, the weak, the sick, the forgotten, people just like him, a movement that was so powerful and so threatening to the greatest empire the world had ever seen, the Roman Empire,
Yeah.
that they hunted him down like a criminal and executed him for the crime of treason against the state. Now, if you know absolutely nothing else about this person that I described, wouldn't you want to know who he was? Wouldn't you
Yeah.
want to know him? Wouldn't
Yeah.
you want to follow him?
Yeah.
Like the Jesus, when we say I'm more drawn to the Jesus of history than I am to the Christ of faith, I think a lot of Christians find that offensive. The
Mhm.
Jesus of history is every bit as worth knowing and
Yeah.
even following
Yes.
than the Christ of faith.
Mhm. I totally agree with you, and I love that. When you're in college, though, and you're all of a sudden having these huge realizations, and you had already committed to this other religion, and, like, how did you handle that
It was
as
hard.
a young adult? I bet that was
It was
hard.
very hard. And look, I handled it the way I think a lot of other people handle it. Number one, I would sort of bring my questions and my doubts to my community, and rather than treat it as doubts and questions, they treated it as sort of betrayal,
Yep,
which was a real
exactly.
turnoff for me right away. I mean, I've
Mhm.
always been a very inquisitive person. The reason I dove headfirst into evangelical Christianity is because I don't do anything in a half-assed way, you know?
Same.
So, um,
Same.
eh, so that's the first thing. And then the second thing, which is also a very normal position, a normal reaction for people in our situation, is to get bitter and angry. And, well, if this one thing is wrong, then the whole thing must be wrong.
Yeah.
And, screw it all. that feeling, right?
Oh,
And
yeah. Been there.
it's not I'm not gonna just take myself down, I'm gonna take everybody else down.
Yes.
Anybody around me who's even remotely faithful, I'm gonna try to destroy that faith.
Right.
Uh, and then that, lasts for a little while and you're like, "What am I doing? Like,
Yeah.
it's not who I am. It's not doing anything." Just like,
Yeah.
and then there's that last phase, which is that sense of peace and
Mhm.
comfort, the understanding that doubt and faith are two sides of the exact same phenomenon.
Yeah.
And so, and then the sort of this larger recognition, which for me came, through my intellectual pursuits, that not only was I getting Jesus wrong, not only was I getting Christianity wrong, but I was also getting religion wrong. And this, I think, is probably the most important thing, that I've realized, that I've taught, that I've written about, that I hope is sort of the thing that outlives me, as far as
Mm.
my thoughts, which is that too often we confuse religion for faith.
Mm.
Religion and faith are not the same thing. Faith is personal, it's ineffable, it's mysterious. I've written an entire book on this subject. It's called God, a Human History. Faith is biological, it is evolutionary, it is part of the cognitive workings of our brain. It is a thing that is not learned, it's a thing that we are born with. It, in fact, predates our species. It predates Homo sapiens. We have evidence of faith, of this sort of belief in the transcendent, the thing that is beyond this realm, that goes all the way back to Neanderthals, and with far less confidence, even further back to Cro-Magnon. So we're
Wow.
talking hundreds of thousands of years before we existed. So that's faith.
Yeah.
Religion is a man made institution, the purpose of which is to control and give meaning to this biological impulse of faith.
Wow.
Religion is the language we use to express faith. It's a language we use to express what is fundamentally inexpressible, right?
Exactly.
This is an
Yes.
emotion that's hard to put into words. I need words. And not only do I need words that other people will understand. It's
Mm.
like if I just started speaking German right now, you'd probably stop understanding me.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's what religion is. Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, Hinduism, these are different languages
Yeah.
that help through metaphor and simile, that help to express to yourself and to like-minded people who can speak your language,
Yeah.
this ineffable, mysterious, evolutionary thing that exists in all human beings called faith. Stop confusing these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You still
Whew.
believe in People are always like, "I believe in Islam. I believe in Christianity." These are not things to believe in. These are things that point the way to the thing to believe in.
Yeah. I love that. That actually wow, I just had, like, an aha moment because I have, like, instinctively been saying to people, it's not that I've given up my faith in God. It's just that it's like I'm speaking a different language. I'm learning a new language. And
Mhm,
and frankly, the reason I do the podcast is because I wanna learn a whole bunch of them. I wanna
mhm.
be bilingual when it comes to this kinda thing. You know what I mean? Like, I wanna
Absolutely.
understand. And the more stories that I'm hearing, the more stories I'm hearing, the more I'm realizing we're all just trying to do the same thing. We're just doing it in a different way.
100%.
So why are we
The
so
emotion is
angry and evil about it? What is that?
because we confuse the faith with the religion. We confuse the signpost
Mm,
that points to the thing with the thing itself, right?
wow,
That's what we do.
I got chills.
And it's a, normal thing. It's what we do. It's a
Yeah,
very human, process. But to that point, like, when I realized this, that's when I decided
Mm.
What I'm really going to be is a kind of linguist. I wanna
Yeah.
be a universal translator. If religion is just language, then learn all the languages. And when you learn all the languages, then you can understand that everybody is basically saying the same thing.
We're
They
just
just
saying
need
it
to be
different,
able to
and it's
speak to each other,
okay.
and it's
Nobody's
okay.
evil. Nobody's evil for saying it different, you know?
That's right.
And I've been trying to say this, but, like, it's so hard for, some people in my life who are still evangelical or, Christian, whatever. They're very they get so caught up in that's not what we call God. It's
Mhm.
not what Jesus did, that's not who, and they're
Mhm.
so afraid and the fear baked into these religions I mean, they're afraid to even look. They don't wanna learn other languages because
No,
they're
no, no,
afraid they're
no.
gonna forget their language, It's
Yeah.
and frankly, you might.
Here's a
You
here's 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 a thing that just in general, you as a human being, not you,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
a person,
Anybody.
should be wary of. If you are afraid that you might find out some factual information that could then challenge your faith, the problem is your faith.
Mm,
The problem is your faith. I mean,
right.
honestly, if you're like, "No, no, no, I can't learn about all that anything else. I can't learn
Yeah,
about another religion, or I can't learn about the historical Jesus because it might influence my faith in some way." Well,
right.
then your faith sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, that's what got me to the point where I started asking more questions. I was like, "Listen, God basically tells me in the scriptures, that God's not going to give up on me until the day of completion. That means I can explore this and see and I'm
Mhm.
protected. Like I don't have to worry." And then I realized in the process like that's where God wanted me to go anyway. Like get out of your bubble. Like the
Yeah.
world is so big and you are just so narrow-minded right now. And you've got to understand and once you start to hear people and listen to their stories, not to argue, not to do apologetics, not to come at them with all your armor
Right,
but
yeah, yeah.
really to understand where they're coming from, you realize we are the same. We're the same. And that's what I'm just trying to get people to understand. I when you were talking on the documentary, I told my husband, I go, "He has my dream job. Like, I can't believe you get to do this. I'm so
I
excited for you."
100% agree, 100% agree.
You literally, what an amazing like, to be able to learn all these different languages, and I bet just any kind of I don't know, I don't even know if the word is, but anything that would be you would maybe make you fearful or not accepting of a person the minute you start to learn their language, you
Mhm.
all of that is gone. Like, I want that in my life. Like, I want to be able to not be afraid of somebody and just love them. And I think everybody really does want that. I mean,
Yeah,
don't you think so?
yeah, I mean, I think deep down, absolutely, everybody. But there's that fear. There's that sense. Let's go back to the foundation of all this, which is religion is identity, and it's
Mm,
identity more than its beliefs.
yeah.
If
Mm,
you are learning things, either other perspectives or other people's viewpoints or just other facts that are in some way creating dents in the things that you believe, remember, religion isn't about belief, religion is identity. So, what's really happening is that your very sense of self is
mhm.
feeling under attack,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Who you are as a human being is being questioned, not the beliefs that you hold.
But who
And
you
so
are,
you
like,
can
what makes
understand.
you
That's
a
right.
human, the
That's right.
thing, and I do remember I used to be a speaker, in the Christian circuit, for, of course,
Mm.
women and children, but not men, and I would always talk about identity in Christ, like, your identity in Christ, and, like, the way you said it, like, faith is not your identity,
Mhm.
religion is, it's like it was basically just indoctrination, teaching people, "This is your identity," and
Yeah.
and to me, I it felt really good at the time, but in retrospect, it's like, well, I mean, I feel like God created me to be my own person. Like, why am I in the Christian faith, the way it looks, or the Christian religion, thank you for that. I'm gonna always watch what I say now. But in that Christian religion, I feel like it's very, you were born evil and gross, and God can't even look at you. But if you ask Jesus in your heart, all of a sudden, you're amazing, and only because He sees Jesus, not because He sees you. So it's
Right.
never you. You're always trash, right? And so, really, I don't know, getting that out of my system has been incredibly difficult.
By the way, I
To
just want to say that's really the concept of original sin is only in Christianity. It does not exist anywhere in the Hebrew scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament. There's no such thing as original sin. There's no such thing
Right,
as sin, as far as sin being the thing that distances you,
keeps us from God.
from God. That does not exist. It doesn't exist. The concept of original sin doesn't exist in any of the Gospels. At no point is the notion of original sin ever, ever talked about either by Jesus or by anyone else in the Gospels. The first person in the Bible to ever come up with this idea, and it wasn't just the first person in the Bible, the first person in history, as far as we know,
Mhm.
to ever come up to conceive of the idea that the snake in paradise was actually the devil, because the snake is never called Satan in anywhere in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament. And that sin of disobedience is a sin that everyone is now born with. The concept of original sin. The first person to ever say
Wow.
such a thing was Paul.
Really? Really?
Paul was the
I don't
first
know how I
person.
didn't figure this out. I
Paul was
guess I
the
just
first
never
person.
noticed. Huh.
Invented that entire idea. Now, if you're a faithful Christian, you believe that Paul was, given that message from God, and that's fine. I'm not saying that
Yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah.
believe in that. I'm just saying
Right.
understand where that idea came from, because it doesn't exist in Judaism. It
Mm,
doesn't exist in Islam, both of which accept the Hebrew scriptures as valid scriptures. It doesn't exist in Buddhism or Hinduism. There is no religion, except for Christianity, that
right.
believes that human beings are born wretched, and
Yeah.
that the only way to do anything about that is, well, then it gets a little complicated. You have to
Yeah,
be
and
baptized
that's
by a priest, or to accept Jesus like
into
once,
your
or
heart.
like there's a
Yeah,
bunch of different ways
and
of
then
thinking.
yeah. Yeah, depending on the sect of Christianity, that's the thing. It's like,
Right.
when I came out of it, I realized, okay, wait. There are some that think you have to speak in tongues in order to be
Mhm.
a Christian. There are some
The
that think
baptism of fire is what
yeah.
actually makes you.
Yeah, and, like, there are some sects that, you have to give confession to a priest. There are some that you have to,
Mhm.
there, and so even the Christian religion can't get on the same page. So they're all speaking different, it's like sub-languages
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
same vein, so
Mhm.
to me,
It's
it's
like
like
dialects or accents or
yeah. Oh, there you go, like a
yeah,
Southern accent, for the
yeah,
Bible Belt. We'll talk like this in the Bible
yeah,
Belt,
yeah.
That's funny. No, it's so interesting. Well, so okay, so tell me what you think. This just like word I think really gets people hung up when Jesus said, "Repent." And you and I both, I think, know at this point that's it's not what they tell us it means. But like, how would you explain that word to somebody who's maybe going through deconstruction and they're still kind of like scared to let go because they're like, what if that's what that meant?
Right. So
Yeah.
if Jesus is a man, then he's
Mhm.
speaking to an audience, and he's speaking with context. And if you don't understand the context,
Right.
then you don't understand what he's saying. Now, if Jesus is God, there is no context, right?
Right.
His words are eternal, they apply forever. It doesn't matter who he's talking to, doesn't matter when he said it. He's not a human being. He's God. So what he says is forever, and he's speaking to you,
Mm.
right? He's not
Yeah.
speaking to some, shoeless Jewish person,
Yeah.
uh, you know, suffering under the yoke of Roman occupation. He's talking to you, Leslie.
Mhm.
And again, that's perfectly fine. But every time we begin this process of what do you think Jesus means when he says, I do think it's very important for the believer, no matter where that believer is in their lives, to start with the first question, who's he
Mm.
talking to?
Yeah.
Like, what is he who's the audience in front of him? And Jesus is telling the Jewish elite to repent of what? Jesus isn't criticizing their faith. He's not saying you don't believe well enough.
Mhm.
He is criticizing their hypocrisy.
Yeah.
He is criticizing the fact that they have married themselves for their own benefit
Mm.
to a rapacious uh, imperial power that has ground the Jewish people under its boot,
Right, right.
except for these guys, because they've married themselves to the Roman Empire. They've made themselves useful to the Roman Empire, so they're fat and wealthy and living, this great
Yeah.
life. When John the Baptist says, "Repent, because the kingdom of God is near," he's talking to them. When Jesus
Right,
says, "Repent, because the kingdom of God is here," he's talking to them, right?
right.
Um,
That's
I had said,
interesting.
I had said earlier, it's funny, again, just going back to the importance of understanding Jesus's life as it's written in the gospel. I had said that he started a movement on behalf of people just like him, right?
Mhm.
The poor, the weak. If you follow Jesus's geography, the path that he takes in that brief, barely 3-year ministry that he has,
Yeah.
he never, until the very end of his life, or in the Gospel of John, the very beginning of his life, there's a contradiction there. Until the end of his life, he never enters not just Jerusalem, he never enters a big city. This guy lives within a 30-minute walk from Sepphoris, the largest city in Galilee. Never preaches there. He
Wow.
lives next to Tiberias, I mean, a massive metropolis on the Sea of Galilee. Never ever enters it. Never preaches there. Where does he preach instead? He preaches in these tiny little villages, right? He preaches in Nazareth. He preaches in Capernaum. He preaches in these like podunk villages to people who are just like him. That's
Mm,
who he preaches. And what does he say? He doesn't say, "Let's hold hands, kumbaya, everything's great, we're all wonderful." No.
mm,
He says, "Woe to the rich, for they
mm,
shall become poor. Woe to the full, for their stomachs will be empty. Woe to those who are on top, because they will be on the bottom." But the flip side of that,
mm.
blessed are the meek, blessed are the
Right,
hungry, blessed are the poor. People love the Beatitudes because they ignore the second part.
right.
All they hear is the blessed part. Except he's not done there, is he? He keeps
Mm-mm.
going.
Mhm.
The first shall be last, and the last shall
So
be first. This isn't a metaphor.
right.
This is Jesus calling for what is nothing less than a social revolution.
Mm,
You people that I'm preaching to, the people that I come from, the world is yours. The kingdom is yours. And those other people, it's not for them.
right,
It's not, when I say it's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, that's not a metaphor. I
right.
mean it.
Mm,
It's not for them. The first
right.
shall be last, the last shall be first. He is preaching the reversal of the social order. And you wonder why they had to put him to death? Of course they have to put him to death.
Of course they
If
did.
Jesus
Yeah.
showed up today and preached the exact same thing he preached 2,000 years ago, we'd put him to death too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're so right. He's just not he doesn't fit into a system. And that's the thing, like, we are so all about system. We love our systems, we humans. And
Mhm.
so if you don't fit into the system, it's yeah, you're out of here. So you're now what do you do now? Do you have a spiritual practice at this point?
I do. So I've written about this in my book Zealot. So in college, once I kind of left Christianity, I was still really yearning for spiritual edification, even as I was expanding my you know intellectual journey in
Yeah.
the study of religion. And I went to a Jesuit university, Santa Clara University. And if you know anything about the Jesuits, they are troublemakers. And it was the Jesuits who kind of sat me down and they were like, "What about the religion of your forefathers? Like, why not Islam?" And I was like,
Mm,
"Honestly, the thing is, I don't know anything about Islam anymore. I just don't.
yeah.
It's been whatever 20 years since I
Mhm.
have practiced it." And they recommended a couple of books to read. Um, and when I read them, it wasn't that I kind of reconverted back to Islam. It's that going back to the language, the language that Islam used to talk about God and humanity and the relationship between the two just was
It
more
just felt
familiar to
yeah,
me.
it
It just
felt
felt
familiar. Yeah.
familiar,
Mhm.
It's like,
Mhm.
oh, this feels more comfortable. This feels more familiar. And so I always joke that, Jesuit priests converted me to Islam, but it's not all that wrong.
Troublemakers.
Yeah. Um,
Just kidding.
and and then, here's so I live I'm living now in a multi-religious family. My wife is Christian, I'm Muslim. I have one son who's Jewish, one son who's
Oh, wow.
Hindu. I have another son who is still uncommitted. Although the other day when we were talking about it, he was like, "Hey, Dad, what religion has the most chocolate?" And I was like, "Christianity, for sure,
For sure,
like
and we have
by a
coffee
long
and
shot."
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. And it was like, "All
Casseroles.
right, I think I might be a Christian." I was like, "All right, there you go." Um,
That's so
we
cute.
talk about so there's a famous saying by the Buddha,
Mhm.
that, uh, kind of animates the way that my family thinks about religion and spirituality. The Buddha once said that if you want to strike water, you don't dig 6 one-foot wells, you dig
Mm,
1 6-foot well. And what he meant by that is that it is important to pick a path, right? If you really want water, and the water is sort of spiritual edification, connection with the divine,
mhm.
experience of transcendence. If you really want that, you can't just like little here and a little there and a little bit there and a little here and a little taste, little flavor and all this stuff. Pick a well. Pick a well. Okay. My well is Islam. My
Yeah,
wife's well is Christianity. My son's well is Judaism. My other son's well is Hinduism, et cetera, et cetera. Pick a
right.
well.
Yeah,
But what the Buddha was also saying in that statement is that no matter what well you pick, the water is the same. It's all the same
mm,
water, but if you want to reach it, pick a well.
yeah,
And so that's my relationship to my religion.
right.
I use the language of Islam, and particularly Sufi Islam, a particular branch of Islam. I use that language in order to construct a well that allows me to give voice to that ineffable
Mm,
experience of faith. But
that's
I'm just as
beautiful.
comfortable drinking from my wife's well. I'm
Yeah,
just as comfortable drinking from anybody else's well. I happen to just, be much more familiar with all these other wells. Um, and I can tell you, both intellectually and from experience, that the water is all the same. It's
yeah.
all just as sweet.
I love that you're saying this because that's where I'm at in my life now, but I know if someone who is still an evangelical is listening to this, they're freaking out, like, "It's
Mhm.
not the same." They're scared,
Not the
and
same.
I
There's only
guess
one well, only one
yeah,
path.
there's like I
And it's not
remember
Christianity, it's my Christianity.
right, my the way that I interpret
Yes,
the Bible,
my
yeah,
particular
yeah,
Christianity
is
is
the
the
right way.
only well. Yeah.
But, I think there's a lot of people who think their well is the only well, and I think that
Yeah.
and of course you wanna protect that and you wanna let other people into your well, because you want them to be okay, but it's like, what if we just let people choose their well
Yeah. And
and,
again,
like, trust?
stop confusing the well with the water. Stop
Yeah.
confusing the destination with the
Mm,
path,
that
right?
is so
Christianity
good.
is a path. Islam is the path.
Right.
Don't confuse the path for the destination, otherwise you
Destination.
stand still,
Yeah.
right?
That's amazing. I love what you're just it's so good. I'm sad for people who can't see this, Eh, but I used to be one of them. So, like,
Mm,
I get, like, that fear that keeps you from understanding this, but maybe, it's kinda like for me, I was like a rock, that needed to be broke open,
mm,
and it had to be dropped a few times before it finally shattered into, and then
mhm.
I could see what I was doing was wrong. But, it was a lot of drops, a lot of falls, a lot of pounding before I finally realized, oh, okay, now I get it, and so maybe there's people listening that maybe this is just one of those poundings.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. I just want
I
people to
always say
be
faith is not an intellectual
yeah,
pursuit. It's faith is an emotion,
yeah,
and you should think about it. Think of faith as an emotion. It makes so much sense once you think that way. It's an
mhm,
emotion like love is an emotion. You can't be talked into loving someone.
yeah,
You know, you can't like intellectually rationalize loving someone. Like that's not how it works.
yeah,
You know, it's mysterious. What is it? I don't know. It's about your who you are and your experience, the moment, all this stuff. Faith is an experiential
yeah,
phenomenon, and so sometimes you can talk to someone, about these things till you're blue in the face and it doesn't
yeah,
really get
yeah,
through. And then suddenly they experience something and
right,
everything just makes sense all of a
yeah.
sudden.
That is so true. Yeah, you can't force any of this on anyone. I mean, and and it And I would never even want to because I feel like the experience has to be personal. It is. I mean, faith is so personal. It has to be something that you experience. And I think what happened with me was when the experience didn't line up with the dogma, with what I was taught. My experience was different. And I thought, "Oh no, if I'm not doing it this way, then I'm going to God's going to take my gifts away and he's not going to let me speak and he's not going to and it's not true. Like God didn't go anywhere. God is actually, very much alive in me.
Yeah,
And so I'm like, so that wasn't true, but I believed it and I was afraid of it for a
yeah,
long time. But you you
yeah,
know, you just don't know until you let go. I don't know,
yeah.
but letting go is it's hard.
It's very hard.
Well, Reza, I really want you to talk just if you don't mind for 2 seconds or 2 minutes even. Um, I'd like to hear a little bit about your new book, The American Martyr or An American Martyr in Persia:
Oh
The
yeah,
Epic Life and Tragic Death of Howard Baskerville. I know that's came out recently, right? And
I
like,
did.
oh,
Yeah. Um, this is a story I've known all my life as an Iranian. Howard Baskerville was a 22-year-old Christian missionary from North Platte, Nebraska, who in 1907
wow.
was assigned by the Presbyterian Church to go to what was then called Persia, what we now call Iran,
Mhm.
um, for a 2-year stint preaching the gospel and teaching English at a missionary school.
Okay.
And he arrived in 1907. Uh, this 22-year-old
How did he
fresh-faced.
arrive? I'm curious.
Oh my god. Well, so it's fun because actually the first, like, 3 or 4 chapters of the book are just the journey because it was
Okay.
10,000 miles in
Oh, yeah.
1907. Like, it's a very
That's
harrowing,
dedication right there.
harrowing journey. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay,
by
well,
every
get the book if
every
you wanna
method
know
you can
more.
imagine, trains and
Trains,
boats
planes,
and
and
ships
no
and
planes.
camels and caravans and
Wow,
donkeys and yeah,
that's
it's
amazing.
commitment,
Yes,
right?
totally, yeah,
Uh,
that guy was in
he
it.
was there to build, the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Um, and he arrives, in a small town called Tabriz in the northwest of, Iran, right in the middle of a popular democratic revolution, the first democratic revolution in the Middle East. This was in
Wow.
190. It started in 1905, and he arrived in 1907. But this was an attempt by a bunch of young, kind of zealous, educated Iranians to transform their country into a constitutional democracy, to remove the sort of unchecked powers of the king, the Shah,
Mhm.
um, and to have a parliament, an elected parliament, a constitution, the rule of law, basically.
Right.
Um, and it was a bloody, bloody revolution,
Oof.
um, one in which the Shah had the full force of the entire Russian Empire on his side. Um, and Howard Baskerville, I mean, I'm telling the very, very short version of this, a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
long, beautiful story. But, he spent the first year and a half or so kind of putting his head down and ignoring what was going on, and teaching his students. Um, the international relations teacher at the school gets murdered by the Shah's men, and he is given the job of teaching international relations. So he's teaching these high school kids democracy. He's teaching them, freedom. And when school is over, they are putting on uniforms, getting guns, and going and fighting it. And the hypocrisy of it all
Hmm.
starts to get to him. um, the church is constantly telling him, it's not your business. You're here to
Yeah.
save, souls, not lives. The U.S. government keeps telling him, it's not your business. You're not an Iranian. You're an American citizen. You cannot have anything to do with this revolution whatsoever.
Oh, wow.
Um, and the school that he teaches at is telling him, it's not your business. You're a teacher. All you can do is teach these kids. But this slow transformation starts to take place in him as he is seeing the suffering and the death and the destruction all around him in the name of these young people who just want a say, what he himself in America takes for granted.
Yeah.
And so it's a long, beautiful, arduous journey of transformation that Howard Baskerville ultimately experiences, but ultimately he can't take it anymore. He
Mhm.
he gives up his teaching job. He quits his mission, and eventually actually gives up his American citizenship when the U.S. Threatens him with treason.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
he says, "Well, then I'm not. Here's my passport. Then I'm not American anymore." And he joins his students in the fight against a Shah to save the lives of the people in this town that is under siege. Um, and this kind of beautiful moment on April 20th, 1909, where the town that he's living in is being starved to death by the Shah's troops. And so they've gone months without, I mean, literally people just dying on the streets. And so he and his students decide to try to break the siege. And in the process of trying to break the siege, he is shot and killed. But his death, the death of this 24-year-old American Christian, on behalf of the Iranian people, became such a global news story that the Shah had no choice but to end the siege and to allow humanitarian assistance to come into the city. And then the revolutionaries used that pause to march to Tehran and bring the Shah down, create a constitution, create a parliament. And the first act of the parliament was to declare Howard Baskerville, this 24-year-old Christian missionary from Nebraska,
Nebraska of all
yeah, to
places.
be a martyr and hero
Oh,
of the revolution. His grave is still, his tomb is still in Tabriz. It's still visited. There are, these beautiful bronze busts of him, in the
wow.
city and I mean, to this day, Howard Baskerville is considered this heroic figure in Iran. I grew up in Iran hearing stories about Howard Baskerville. Then I came to America and realized no one in
We
America
don't know
had ever heard of this
anything
kid
about
before.
this guy. This
Yeah,
is
I'd never
amazing.
heard of this kid. Like this, like heroic. In Iran, he's kind of talked about as the Lafayette, right?
Wow.
The way that Americans think of this, like Frenchman who fought for America next to
Right.
Americans. He's this American who fought for Iran next to Iranians, and yet no one had ever heard of him. And
Wow.
so,
So you're
I
bringing him to the United
yeah,
States. I
yeah,
love it.
it's a story I've wanted to tell, and I've given the
Ah,
short version of the story, but it's a
well,
remarkable story, and also part of the reason why I'm drawn to it, besides these obvious, this is
mhm.
incredible questions that it asks about faith and responsibility and what does it mean, like when he decided to join the revolution, people assumed that he had left Christianity, that
Right.
he had converted to Islam. And he writes this beautiful letter to his mother in which he's like, I I've not left Christianity. This is Christianity.
Mhm.
I haven't left,
Yeah.
Jesus. This is what Jesus would do. Confronted with this profound suffering,
Yeah.
right? This is what Jesus would do. I haven't left America. This is what Americans should do, you know?
Mm.
So he was doing it in the name of his country and his religion, even though everyone around him thought, well, he must have
Sold
abandoned
out.
his
Yeah.
country and abandoned his religion.
Ugh.
But I'm also my all my life I've always been drawn to these historical figures, whether they be prophets,
Mhm.
or religious leaders, or just average people like Howard Baskerville, who, when confronted by injustice and oppression, activate their faith to do something about it.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, that's who Jesus of Nazareth was. It's who Muhammad was. It's who Moses was. It's who the Buddha was.
Mhm.
It's who Howard Baskerville was. Those are the people that just turn me on. Like those are the people that I want to like know more and be more like you.
Well, and share their stories, you
And
know?
and to tell the world about them, exactly.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Wow, Reza, thank you so much for sharing your time so generously and also just so much wisdom and good stuff. Ugh, I mean, wow. I'm
Mhm.
like, my mind is racing with some of the things that you taught us today. So thank you
Oh,
for
my
that. And
pleasure.
thank
I
you.
really enjoyed it.
Well, I honor your journey and I thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to put a bunch of links, guys. Don't worry, you're going to get to get the books that he's written and all the good stuff that he's got out there. I will have all the links there in the show notes. So don't you worry. Thanks, Reza. Have a great day.
Thank you, Leslie. Take care.